Paula Smith, Built on Faith.
It was a cold spring day in 1880 in Western Britain, and three siblings clung to each other in fear. Their father had just passed away from tuberculosis, the very same disease that took their mother's life 2 years prior. Not only were they in the throes of grief, but they were about to be abandoned by their family. Their stepmother, aunts, and uncle were too poor to take them in. With nowhere to go, they were destined to be on the streets or in the dreaded workhouse, a harsh prison-like environment that was Britain's answer for housing the poor. The workhouses gave them accommodation and a basic education, but it came with a harsh labor, malnutrition, and abuse. Fortunately for these three children, the tables were about to turn, offering them a life in stark contrast to the workhouse alternative. For 14-year-old Ellen, her sister Sarah, age 11, and brother Edward, age 7, they were about to embark on a journey based on luck, faith, and determination to build a good life. They were taken under the wing of a vicar and a benefactress who together got them enrolled in an orphanage. In fact, the only one in Britain that accepted poor children, on condition that the children were born into wedlock. Both parents had died and their family could not take them in. They were enrolled in the new orphan houses in Bristol. I can just imagine what it was like for these children to arrive at this orphanage. It housed over 2,000 children in 5 massive stone buildings like the one behind me. The orphanage was run by a Christian evangelist named George Muller, who not only fed, clothed, and housed these children, but he gave them a good education. He made sure they learned their 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic, and the girls were trained to go into domestic service after leaving the orphanage. The boys were taught how to grow their own food and were educated in a trade. George Muller taught these children to be respectable, employable, and self-sustainable citizens, and above all else, to hold faith in the highest regard as a pathway to support their mindset of abundance. Mr. Muller built this orphanage based on one principle only: rock-solid faith in God. He was a devout evangelist with an unshakable faith. He believed that when he prayed, God would answer his prayers. His life mission was to prove this point, and he set a shining example through his actions. Not once did he ever campaign for money for the orphanages, nor did he accept a wage. Instead, he humbly survived off the donations and tended to the orphans through this money that came through strangers eager to support his cause. And from the money that came forward, these orphanages, these 5 massive buildings, were built. One can just only imagine the impact that his faith had on these orphans, to be taken off the streets and a life of destitution, to be placed in these brand new buildings, fed, clothed, and educated, and given a job by the time they left the orphanage. It truly was a gift from God, a sign that prayer could be answered. Mr. Muller was a strong example of faith, and he influenced and motivated these children to prepare for adulthood and to become self-sustainable. Ellen and her siblings were determined to make a good life for themselves, and by age 17, they were employable and ready to leave. Ellen found her way to a wealthy family working as a governess, teaching wealthy children their 3 R's, not only in English, but in French and German. When foreign visitors would come to visit, she was summoned forth to be their translator. In fact, she was so good and so skilled at what she did 5 years later, she found herself in Paris, France, working as governess for two wealthy families, the Baron de Montenac, who came from a long line of French military, and for the infamous Rothschilds. Ellen continued in this career for 15 years before moving back to England, settling down, and raising a family. She devoted her life in humble service to her family and her community with her husband, Joe. Her sister, Sarah, had also gone into domestic service after leaving the orphanage before marrying and settling down. And little brother, Edward, he was trained to be a baker, and he did that before enlisting in the military. I can just imagine the immense gratitude they had for Mr. Muller, for taking them under his wing, for instilling faith in them and teaching them the skills they needed to go out into the world and make a good life. Looking back at the legacy of Mr. Muller, I am in deep awe of his devout faith and compassion. He saved the lives of over 17,000 orphans. He took them off the street and gave them hope for a bright future. And 3 of those orphans happened to come from my own family line, Sarah, Edward, and my great-grandmother, Ellen. Thanks to Mr. Muller, my family were saved from despair and poverty. It's a most inspiring story to me, and it teaches me that we only need to have faith, determination, and trust to build a good life, to live through the eyes of grace and abundance as a means towards happiness and fulfillment. Mr. Muller embodied this philosophy, and he passed it on to my family, and for that, we are most grateful.